Day 767 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So, starting off, we'll take a look at the Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 442,000 military personnel losses, which represents an additional 710 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, so 20 tanks, 17 APVs, and a relatively whopping 32 artillery. And it will be easy to show you many of those losses today, with plenty of examples found within a single photo frame. So we'll head to the map today and start out in the Donbass, as in a major offensive yesterday, Russian forces launched one of the largest and most devastating assaults for this year, just near to Avdiivka, west of Tenenka, and devastating for Russia, that is, as this Russian assault involved a staggering 36 tanks, 12 BMP infantry fighting vehicles, and hundreds of soldiers. As such, fierce fighting ensued, consequently resulting in the destruction of 12 Russian tanks and 8 BMP Russian vehicles in a single engagement, as seen in the provided imagery. And despite the scale and intensity of the Russian attack, the Russian forces failed to advance their frontline positions even by a single meter. And as a result, the aftermath of the battle left a graveyard of twisted metal and smouldering wreckage scattered across the scarred landscape. And I would say it looks like Russia is paying a high price for small gains, even when Ukraine is short on ammunitions. But no gains were actually made here. But certainly it was a very concerted effort by Russian forces to make a run for new positions and capture more land, although clearly through a combination of fortified Ukrainian positions and a slight uptick in their shell reserves at the current juncture, the Russian army just bit off more than they could chew in this region. Then taking a further look around on the map, because somewhere in the east there appears to be quite the FPV munition upgrades for the AFU. This one creates a sizable explosion, possibly thermobaric. So just when you think the battlefield reaches some static state of being, technological innovations and upgrades come to the fore. Then, somewhere in the northeast, we saw a Ukrainian FPV munition hit a Russian ammunition cache. Then somewhere else, impressively for Russia, might I add, we saw they fielded a Mr. S 152mm SPG, which was subsequently destroyed by the Ukrainian military from the 14th Separate Mechanized Brigade. Then we also saw a stray Russian tank destroyed by Ukrainian soldiers from the 80th Separate Airborne Assault Brigade. Which doesn't mean much on a day like today, does it? But this one was really cooking off. Then we also saw some impressive footage of a British-supplied ASRAAM SAM system in Ukrainian service downing a Russian Supercam UAV over the southern front. And these surface-to-air launched ASRAAM-supplied missiles to Ukraine are really starting to make a name for themselves, compliments of the Brits. Then we head further southwest as another Russian armoured thrust was blunted, this time at the Zaporizhia front at Novoprokopivka. And around 11 knocked out vehicles can be seen on that footage. And events like these are not a daily occurrence right now, and so I would venture a guess to say that Russian forces are trying to break through Ukrainian defensive lines in hopes that the Ukrainian artillery stockpiles are low enough for such an attempt to be successful. But it would appear, evidently, they're learning the hard way, which is more or less part of the Russian army's motto in this war. And so they will probably switch back to meat waves from golf cart-like ATVs out of a pure requirement by commanders to keep pressure on the front. And that might sound like a joke, but it's more or less part of the Russian army's reality at the moment. But as for a broader picture, due to the commencement of higher levels of inbound flows of artillery shells to the AFU, what we're likely to see more and more now is, well, starting off, Ukrainian land losses, which we've already seen, followed by stagnation, stalemates, or at least failed Russian assaults, which might be what we're seeing at the moment. Then followed by Ukrainian liberations in various pockets and of various sizes. The fluidity of the battle space. Then looking around in the south, as there are a couple more examples of notable losses in the region, with another destroyed Mr. S SPG, so the big old howitzer on tracked wheels in the Zaporizhia region, so 2 for 2. Looks like Russia may have pulled together some Soviet stocks from the Far East, or cannibalized 2 or 3 just to make one. Then, also in Zaporizhia, a Ukrainian FPV drone slammed into a Russian BMP-3, causing a catastrophic ammunition detonation and turret toss. And yes, turret tosses are not just for Russian tanks, as they also occur on Russian infantry fighting vehicles as well. Then headed a bit further down south to the Black Sea, as for a few bits and pieces of updates for this region, as it's been suggested that Russia may soon use Kalibr cruise missiles in attacks on Ukraine, as stocks of their Kh-101 air-launched cruise missiles are dwindling, according to Bordanov, Ukraine's military intel chief. And as for a refresher, Russian forces extensively used naval-launched Kalibr cruise missiles in mass attacks on Ukrainian targets in 2022 and 2023. However, the recent campaign has mainly used the Kh-101s and the Kh-555s, those missiles, also Shahed drones, and a small number of ballistic missiles as well. Bordanov also said that Russia may be stockpiling some Kalibr cruise missiles. However, this might not be by choice, as the Russian Black Sea Fleet was forced to reposture into a more distant and defensive stance in recent times. And as for the general Russian sentiment, for the large number of devastating Russian naval losses in this region over recent times, Russian Z channels are expressing anger and confusion over the destruction of the Black Sea Fleet on Telegram. So they question why Kalibr missile carriers have stopped striking Ukraine, leaving the fleet vulnerable to Storm Shadow missiles and surface naval drones. The channels, of which there are many, express a demand for retaliatory strikes and question the fleet's purpose if it is incapacitated. So many Russian Telegram channels seem to be questionably scratching their heads, confused as to why Russian warships in the region aren't doing a whole bunch of anything much at this current time. Then briefly, we move to Saratov in Russia, as yesterday it was noted that one of the Kh-101 cruise missiles intended for Ukraine crashed near the city of Krasnoyarsk. A fragment of the missile's tail section was found at the site where it had fallen and detonated. Then headed across to some news for the day, so starting off, in some French military aid updates, again, 300 short-range Mistral surface-to-air missiles that were to be delivered to Ukraine in early 2025 will now be delivered in the summer of 2024. They protect against a range of aerial threats, including fixed-wing aircraft, UAVs, helicopters, and a number of precision-guided cruise missiles as well. And this announcement comes at a time when France has recently announced the sending of hundreds of Aster 30 surface-to-air missiles, which were actually originally planned to be sent in 2026, and are now instead getting fast-tracked to be sent very, very shortly this year. Then in some other news, General Charles Brown, chairman of the US Joint Chiefs of Staff, stated that the risk of war escalation related to the delivering of long-range ATACMS missiles to Ukraine has decreased compared to before. And at this stage now, this is absolutely true, because since their initial use by Ukraine about 6 months ago, the ATACMS missiles, Ukraine has now since put on display its longer-range drone platforms that have made it all the way up to Moscow and St. Petersburg successfully. And so back to this story, the ATACMS missiles with their 165 kilometers or 300 kilometer range, depending on the block variant, is certainly better off used against targets in occupied Ukraine now anyway, such as further back airfields. And not to mention, 300 kilometers of range for the ATACMS is just a fart in the wind in comparison to the range capabilities of Ukraine's military now. So nobody is going to bat an eyelid at the send-in of these ATACMS missiles anymore. Then in some other news, a Russian propaganda study published by the Institute for the Study of War, or the ISW, released a must-read study a few days ago detailing how Russia continues to deceive the world and what needs to be done to counter it. The study highlights Russia's use of perception manipulation to advance its interests globally, a strategy that has been a key part of the Kremlin's toolkit for decades. The study also exposes the lies and deceptions of the Russian military, which have been debunked by the Ukrainian army in the current war of aggression. And as detailed in the study entitled Denying Russia's Only Strategy for Success, if you want to look it up, it emphasizes that the West must not fall for the continued lies and deception of the reflexive control, quote-unquote, propaganda programs now massively deployed by the Putin regime, as it was named. And last I checked, Russia spends $1.9 billion a year on external propaganda with their propaganda troll farms and the like. And if you'd like to meet some of those on their payroll, well, you are in luck. Because all you have to do is scroll down to the comments section of this video. There's plenty of them in there for you. Then headed across to a Russian military mobilization blunder segment today, guys. As in the battle-scarred lands near Avdiivka, only 15 mobilized soldiers from the so-called Donetsk People's Republic state how they survived a brutal assault on the village of Semenivka. Battered and demoralized, they then refused their command's orders to mount another futile attack on nearby Orlivka. And these are both very relevant locations on the map right now. But at the moment for these guys, they are accused of desertion and evasion from combat tasks. As such, they're appealing to someone, perhaps the Russian MOD. It's not quite clear in this video, but my guess is their pleas will go unheard. Then, what's likely next up for these guys is they'll be threatened at gunpoint by commanders to either go on the next assault or be eliminated by the Russian army. Not much of a choice, really. Or option number 3, full-scale mutiny. Then moving across to something a bit lighter to balance things out right now, as here we see trench cats from the Ukrainian Korn group, somewhere in the Donetsk Oblast, and clearly battle-hardened as well, as no sounds from artillery shelling look like they're going to wake up these little troops. Then headed across to a quick funny to round it all off today, guys. And speaking of Russian propaganda, so some of Russia's own internal messaging sought to promote the prowess of the mighty Russian army with the use of their latest ground-based drones and how effective they are. But there is nuance, as they used stills from the footage of Ukrainian drones. But there is nuance, as they used stills from the footage from Ukrainian drone video that I showed you just yesterday. They failed to mention that their ground drones were destroyed moments later by a Ukrainian FPV. Then, to add further insult to injury, there was no mention that this little Russian bad boy of a ground drone was actually stuck, unable to move after it got caught on a piece of Russian scrap metal from a previous combat engagement. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like and comment. I do appreciate it all, as I always say, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!